Alternate history might seem like neutral territory, but it's almost always shaped to some extent by the creator's political worldview. Think about two of the most common alternate history scenarios. What if Germany won World War II, and what if the Confederacy won the American Civil War? One creator might use them to show how horrifying those scenarios would be, to explore dystopias and the dangers of certain ideologies. But another might quietly suggest that maybe things wouldn't have been so bad, and atrocities are glossed over or completely ignored. That's not just a creative choice, that's propaganda or historical revisionism under the guise of neutral analysis. But history cannot be neutral. It's not just a list of events. It's a collection of stories written by people with political biases. It is quite literally the politics of the past. I have serious concerns about a subset of the right, both in the United States and Europe, but not all of the right. There are many flavors of right-wing politics. If we want to have an honest conversation, those who label all of the right as fascist need to reevaluate. I mean, this guy's clearly not a fascist.
Do a better job of getting across that America is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare.
He's conservative, but somewhere in the libertarian right part of the spectrum on my oversimplified political compass here. And this woman, despite being more on the authoritarian side, wasn't really aligned with 1930s style fascism. I think their policies were bad for the American and British working class, but they weren't ideologically aligned with fascists. Fascism is an authoritarian right-wing ideology though, so what makes it so dangerous? They blamed minorities for the nation's decline and forcefully got rid of this group and political dissidents by concentrating them in camps. They built a cult of personality around their leader, where followers excused their every action. They lied constantly and built a media bubble where reality no longer mattered. They undermined democracy through an attempted coup, centralizing power in the hands of one person, and weaponizing law enforcement against political opponents. They pushed expansionist claims, openly talking about annexing the territory of other countries. This all applies to both 1930s fascists and the MAGA movement. When I call this portion of the right neo-fascist, I'm not being hyperbolic. They push policies and have beliefs that line up very closely with the 1930s fascist movements. People are being picked up by ICE agents in unmarked cars and sent to camps without due process, without getting in front of a judge. Some of them completely innocent legal residents and even citizens, because without due process, how do you prove you're a citizen in the first place? Trump's deportation policy can easily be used to go after political dissidents or anyone the regime doesn't like. A legal process is the one thing that separates a regular police force from something like the Gestapo or KGB. I don't know how far the Trump regime will go, but you don't have to be as bad as Germany in 1945 to be fascist. Mussolini's regime in Italy coined the term. This all genuinely worries me. Where is the US headed? And are we going to see something similar in Europe? Most regular people on the right, in my view, are not open fascists. So does this not worry you? Since when did the right stop caring about freedom and justice? I mean, especially if you consider yourself an honest historian, shouldn't this comparison be obvious? Before moving on, consider checking out the new revamped membership perks like early access to videos and mentions at the end of videos. This is a small channel, so any support is much appreciated. I went down a bit of a rabbit hole researching Dean, or Mr. Z. He gave my channel a big boost early on through a collab video and shoutout. He was always super respectful and professional with me. I think pointing that out is important. I don't aim to question his character at all. But his politics on the other hand. I mean, what is this? Some of these posts on his X and YouTube just have me at a complete loss for words. Excusing every action by Trump, zero regard for democracy, 1800s style white man's burden rhetoric, and outright support for America annexing other countries.
Do you think we should once again try to acquire Greenland? Oh yeah, definitely. Let's be honest here, in terms of real politics, the United States dominates all of North America, probably the entire Western Hemisphere if we're being totally honest there. Who has jurisdiction over Greenland right now? It's Denmark, and they're not doing too much with it. Frankly, the only reason they continue to hold Denmark is because we allow them to. We've occupied Greenland before, and we could certainly do so now if we really wanted to. We could pull sort of a thing that Britain did with South Africa after the Napoleonic Wars, when they're like, alright, Netherlands, we're giving you your territories back, except for that, we want the Cape Colony. I think more than anything it'd be a big morale boost for the United States, but of course it also packs a lot of resources, strategically because it's right there on the Arctic Circle.
Now how do you plan to do that, Dean? They're not exactly interested. Do you want to do a military invasion of Greenland? You think switching out all of your European allies for Greenland is worthwhile? Because European leaders have been pretty clear about where they stand on this issue. I'm fairly certain this would cost the US its world hegemony. The reason the US is the most powerful country in the world is its massive sphere of influence, and Europe plays a massive part in that. In reality, all this rhetoric is achieving is that Denmark is just going to replace the US as defense partner in Greenland. Instead of the US, it'll work with France, Germany, and the other Nordic countries. I'm also really doubtful Trump would fully commit when faced with all of Europe opposing this. I actually make a video covering this type of scenario on my channel, so go check that video out if you're interested. but digging just barely below the surface, I shouldn't have been surprised. Mr. Z pivoted away from alternate history and toward politics quite some time ago, and he isn't just your average slightly conservative lesser of two evils Trump voter. He is all in on Trump and what I label neo-fascism, and has been for quite some time. His video on what if Poland joined the Axis powers portrays a fascist Germany as liberators of Europe.
The Axis alliance of Germany, Italy, and Japan was formed with one goal in particular: to contain and combat the Soviet Union. While today we think of the Axis powers as a vehicle through which Germany attempted to gain control over the whole of Europe, that wasn't how it started out.
It's a wild example of historical revisionism that leans heavily into fascist propaganda, framing the Axis as merely anti-communist rather than expansionist and genocidal. It feels like the goal from the start was to create a victorious fascist Europe, and history was bent to fit that outcome.
Poland seems like it would have been a prime contender for Axis membership. However, disagreements between Germany and Poland lingered, the free city of Danzig. It was this city which formed the basis of Germany's invasion of Poland in our world.
Hitler's core beliefs like settling Eastern Europe and getting rid of Slavic peoples are completely ignored.
In this alternate timeline, a Germany which became aligned with Poland following a concession of Danzig would see the two coordinate an invasion and Balkanization of the Soviet Union. With an invasion being launched this early on, the Soviets would not have had the opportunity they did in our world to achieve partial industrialization and militarization. Any coordinated effort between Germany and Poland to invade and conquer the Soviet Union would turn out successful.
Somehow Germany, with the help of a fascist Poland, topples the Soviet Union without ever facing the Western allies. This kind of video is not just bias, it's complete fantasy and historical revisionism. Britain and France didn't go to war just because they loved Poland. They wanted to stop German domination of Europe. A massive Axis-led conquest of the USSR and conquest of Eastern Europe would have triggered a response. The scenario only works if you ignore the basic motivations of the Western powers and completely rewrite Hitler. In this video, he suggests eugenics, the idea that society should try and improve itself by getting rid of undesirable genes could save America.
This world would see an America aware of who it was. One bent on progress, not of the social kind, but of the scientific kind. As a matter of fact, the genetic discoveries and innovations of this time would lead Americans to become more genetically aware, and thus favor eugenics, the process of selecting the best genes to pass on to the next generation to create a stronger breed of people.
In his Bay of Pigs video, he completely whitewashes US interventionism, ignoring how American economic sabotage was what pushed Cuba towards the USSR in the first place.
The US ultimately granted recognition to the newly formed government of Fidel Castro, not realizing Castro carried deeply anti-American sentiments and was becoming increasingly sympathetic to communist ideals. The breaking point came with the warming of Cuban relations with the Soviet Union and the nationalization of American-owned industries within Cuba. Then President Dwight Eisenhower felt that enough was enough and prepared an operation to remove Castro from power.
In this video comparing Trump to past presidents, he romanticizes William McKinley and the Gilded Age, a period in American history marked by immense inequality, corruption, and widespread suffering for most people.
Trump's expressing this interest for Gilded Age America. And by the time of McKinley, by the end of his term, you had basically the political corruption rooted out for the most part.
Being biased is one thing, we all are, but Mr. Z seems to be intentionally warping history in unrealistic ways to always fit his narrative. In this video, he shares his definition of fascism with us. He defines it as
an embracing of extreme nationalist tendencies,
check,
a financial practice of corporatism,
check,
fascism has also gone hand in hand with the philosophy of irredentism,
check.
At root, it's an ideology of us first in our own lands, even if those lands are currently occupied by another people.
Check.
Fascism seeks to impose a strong and cohesive national identity upon its now homogenous group through what at times borders on propaganda.
Check.
This would include the elimination of undesirables and those who fail to conform to the idea of what is the national identity and way of behavior.
Check.
And here is a point in which fascism heavily criticizes the ideals of democracy and liberalism, posing that democracy be like a body constantly pulling itself in different directions, hindering itself from actual progress for the sake of maintaining unsustainable fairness.
Check.
Now on liberalism, fascism perceives it as a divisive philosophy which promotes selfishness and lack of discipline, believing it to be a destructive slope into the destruction of national unity, identity, and civility. Thus, it is often the case in fascist societies that liberties and rights be curtailed in the name of chiseling out this ideal national character.
Check.
Despite this, it has been argued that given how well tailored fascist societies are to their respective practicing people, the need for, quote, wiggle room of excess liberties is unnecessary.
Wiggle room of excess liberties? What? Just because everyone's going to be white, that doesn't mean getting rid of free speech and basic rights will just be fine. White people aren't a hive mind. Overall, I find the video very insightful. He describes fascism mostly correctly, but defends it really, and certainly makes it sound like he doesn't have that much of a problem with it.
It's equally surprising then the level of lip service paid to dismissing these ideals as cartoonishly evil and preying on misunderstanding, when in truth there's much we could learn from studying this unique ideology. It's almost like a part of this dark side of the force of politics, if I can make a Star Wars reference. We recognize it, we're allowed to denounce it as evil, but study of it and recognition of its potential merits is highly frowned upon and discouraged, making it this forbidden knowledge which ultimately tempts and radicalizes individuals who otherwise could have utilized this knowledge to better understand governmental policy and world history as a whole. Just as an example, the state perceived as a body does tremendous things for recognizing that the various functions and interactions of the state are like that of a superorganism, one with organs of government and industry, in which the very citizens are its literal lifeblood, with the government at the top serving as the organism's brain, and like an organism, though at times it can feel hesitation, action and decision with consensus is necessary for progress to be achieved. If a people lose their cohesion through one way or another, they fracture and cease to be a people.
He describes fascism as forbidden knowledge, kind of cool even. I think that reveals a lot about neo-fascist appeal today. Many young men get pulled into online rabbit holes where it feels like they're uncovering some secret truth. It's edgy, the dark side of the force, and it makes you feel smart and part of a community. That's exactly how people get indoctrinated. The reality is, it's not some cool, dark side of the force. A fascist society just sucks, even for the so-called dominant group. It doesn't only function at the expense of minorities or undesirables, it's built on the suffering of everyone. You're forced to conform and lack basic civil liberties. All autocracies eventually end up completely out of touch with everyday people and causing a whole lot of suffering. It seems to me like Mr. Z was pulled into these online spaces, like so many young men, and now fully adheres to this kind of insane thinking. It has become increasingly clear where he stands since he pivoted away from alternate history. All of his videos today are praising Trump autocrats, dictators, and American expansionism. Mr. Z has also made an hour-long video explaining his political ideology, which I assume is what he'd point to if accused of being a fascist. What's interesting is that the video doesn't actually refute that label. Instead, it feels intentionally vague. While he outlines some technical differences, the ideological foundations are still rooted in fascist thought.
The tenets of Mr. Z thought are, the United States is not made up of one people, but multiple people. There are multiple nations in America. It is made up of multiple different people groups, these ethno-religious groups. You have populations who by and large share a similar background, but at the core of that, something that binds them closely together is a shared faith. America has in place a system that will account for the needs of those various peoples and can fix it if only it would redraw borders. What do you expect when you have so many populations just arbitrarily lumped together with all the polarizing politics between the Democrats and Republicans? Would these be massive federal level issues if the Democrats and Republicans, or the populations that comprise them, had their own states where they dominated and could do whatever they wanted and create whatever policy they wanted within their state?
It sounds to me a whole lot like fascism adapted to a multicultural country like the US. He believes nations are built on single ethno-religious groups, just like fascists. He just thinks the US contains several of them.
Monsieur Z thought, if I had to give it another name, I would dare call it Utahism. Utah has sort of been a big factor in inspiring this idea of what we could have for all the other nations in America. One of the frustrating things too is, I talk about something like this and people are like, oh, that sounds like ethno-nationalism. It's like, that's not really the point. Even the situation with the whole Catholic American nation sort of defeats that argument where, we're talking about multiple different ethnic groups that have coalesced or come together because of a shared religious background there. When I bring up ethnicity, it's because ethnicity is often tied to culture. If you grew up in a certain background, if you grew up in an Italian background, there's certain things that go hand in hand with that. And people take that to the extreme of, okay, this is just segregation you're talking about. It's not that. It's literally just making more Utahs.
His proposed solution, Utahism, is essentially uber segregation by cultural identity. But what happens to minorities who don't match the dominant group in their region, Dean? I don't bring all of this up to attack Mr. Z personally. I say it with an understanding of how people get pulled into this. It seriously worries me how many young men in particular are drawn to this ideology. It's framed as edgy or cool, the dark side of the force, and offers a sense of community and belonging. But really, it's just indoctrination into a hateful, spiteful worldview. And it won't just hurt minorities or those who don't conform. In the long run, it hurts everyone, as democracy and basic liberties are eroded or even destroyed. The US of Z channel is quite interesting. At first, you might think it's a secondary Mr. Z channel run by Dean, but it's actually a separate project run by Jacob. My understanding is that the US of Z was created to maintain a focus on alternate history, while the main Mr. Z channel pivoted more towards political content. But the US of Z channel actually makes scenarios that are quite different from Mr. Z's. He doesn't engage in the same kind of historical revisionism. The 1930s fascists are clearly portrayed as evil, and very directly so.
The Soviets closed in on Berlin, and the Axis fell. In the coming weeks and months, the United States and Soviet Union would uncover the brutality of the Nazi and Japanese regimes.
I think the most notable bias is an exaggeration of US power, such as where he seems to suggest they could conquer the world after the Second World War.
The United States had a total of 150 aircraft carriers at their peak in the Second World War. By contrast, every country in the world today has only 50 aircraft carriers when you combine all of the navies of every single country in the world. By the end of the war, America had a navy large enough that it was said that it could take over the entire world if it wanted to.
He just has normal biases, primarily rooted in American exceptionalism. He offers grounded analysis and doesn't blatantly try to spread an ideology. He opposes authoritarianism on both the right and the left. I would speculate he's more of a normal conservative, but I can't know for sure. He doesn't really make his politics overtly obvious. My scenarios focus on world building. I don't explore every branch, I pick one and flesh out that world in detail. In these scenarios, my biases obviously shine through as well. I don't think the British Empire could survive by fighting tooth and nail for every colony, only by becoming a voluntary federation. I think a more interconnected European Union would strengthen Europe's global position and benefit Europeans overall. In my future scenarios, I tend to portray egalitarian societies with strong social programs more positively, while depicting societies built on completely unregulated capitalism as corporatist and more dystopian. You can also clearly tell that I'm a European and a Scandinavian by the topics I like to cover. Most of my alternate history videos are on European history, and as some of you have noticed, I do have quite a few videos on the Kalmar Union and Scandinavia more broadly. My home region is, I hope understandably, just interesting to me. I'd like to think I also have decent analysis. I don't do historical revisionism or propagandized, but my biases do shine through more than in someone like Possible History's videos, as they take the time to explore many alternatives, whereas I just pick the things I want to focus on, which is of course affected by my politics. But that's about all for now. Big thank you to members Polanska, Pac-Man, Willykins, and Deblobo for supporting the channel. If you also want to be mentioned at the end of videos or get membership perks like early access to videos, consider joining. This is a small channel, so any support is much appreciated. Also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this in the future. See you next time.